What's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be taking a little introduction into female performance enhancing drugs. Now this is an extremely sensitive and important topic to go into, and one that there is much misinformation out there, and one that I will try my best to make understandable and digestible for you guys, but one that cannot be oversimplified too much, because at some point you cross a threshold where you're oversimplifying something and it actually comes across as being incorrect. So again, we'll try our best to avoid the scientific jargon, and if there is any used, I'll do my best to explain it in layman's terms so that things are understandable, as I said. But the world of female performance enhancement is a minefield at best. Okay, now straight away the first thing we think of is anabolic and androgenic steroids. Of course, you know, it's usually the first thing that springs to mind when you think about competitive athletes using enhancements, right? But there is a whole other element and world of variables that we can leverage to drive up performance enhancing effect within any human physiology, you know, to drive up them factors of growth promotion, you know, drive up muscle protein synthesis, increase muscle protein accretion, drive up more micronutrient partitioning, so on and so forth. Before we even come to anabolic and androgenic steroids, now just to quickly dive into, I don't want to spend this video talking about anabolic and androgenic steroids, because that is, you know, where we're going to lead on to next from this point. But the problem we have here with females jumping straight to there, right, going from 0 to 100, is that females belong in a class of people that we class as the androgen sensitive, right, which means the effects of anabolic and androgenic steroids are going to be far greater in them than they would be within a male. This is seen by quite evident when you look at the dosaging that you see with a female Olympian and a dosage of a male Olympian. Their cycles, or quote unquote, that they're running would be very different in degree, or at least they should be anyway. I'm sure there is some out there that are questionable, and this comes down to being sensitive to it, right? And it means that a little will go a long way, a hell of a long way. So there is much more greater degree of devil within the dose with the androgen sensitive than there would be, again, with males. People that, you know, we are built to utilize and use testosterone in excess, and we are much better at handling it than someone like a female or a child or an elderly would be. Now, the effects of anabolic and androgenic steroids outside of the physiological realm, so in that supraphysiological realm, are irreversible. The thing that we're thinking about here is virilization, and all that refers to is the development of male characteristics because of this excess of the hormone, or well, the hormones, androgens, specifically testosterone we're thinking about here, and it can drive up side effects such as excessive hair growth, a change in your pitch and vocal, so you're changing your voice, enlargement of the clitoris, and it can have detrimental effect on your uterus, your ability to reproduce, give birth and have babies, and these are all things that, as I said, could potentially, right, and I say could because they're not 100% certain. There is always, you know, every single one of my videos, it seems to be that we say this genetic individuality between people, but of course, even now, when you look at anabolic and androgenic steroids, we can say that a majority would have this effect, but there will always be outliers that are tolerable, or more tolerable towards these things, and less tolerable as well. So in a general sense, you will potentially run into these problems. Like I said, these virilizing effects, these masculine characteristics that will make themselves known over time, and with dose and timing being the variables that would change the degree at which that happens. It seems important for us to avoid that at best as best as possible, you know, and only think there's a select few individuals that I would probably say the risk-reward profile, well, I mean, it's not my opinion or my place to say whose risk-reward profile is worth it, right? That is an individual decision. But looking at a general sense, you'd think, you know, female Miss Olympia is going to have to push things much further than a bikini pro, right? Because of the varying degree of risk reward and the level that they are trying to achieve within their within their physiology, and the physique they're trying to attain is going to take a lot more to get to there than it is to get to here. That's not to say that there are not some questionable things done within bikini, even though the muscular structure and size needed to get to is not quite the same as Miss Olympia. But yeah, so the point of this first video: what can females leverage within performance enhancing drugs prior to anabolic and androgenic steroids? So what can they do up to this point here that is not going to leave them with the negative virilizing effects of going outside of the realm of physiological hormones? But yeah, as I said, the purpose of this video is not to dive into anabolic and androgenic steroids within females. That is a follow-on video from here. Now the point of this is to highlight there's this big world of performance enhancing drugs and compounds that females have to manipulate and utilize here that are not going to lead them with these virilizing effects, these masculine characteristics that are irreversible. So there's a lot of variables they can utilize and manipulate to drive those hypertrophic outcomes that we are looking for, right? So more increased muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein accretion, more nutrient partitioning, just to name a few. Maybe the ability to mobilize fat cells, fat from fat cells, the anabolic properties of some of these compounds without the androgenic properties alongside it that you find when you start looking into the realm of anabolic and androgenic steroids. So the purpose of this video is just to highlight and introduce you to what could be a much better and much more appropriate system to put in place, to leverage as many of these different variables as possible before coming to this inevitable fact. And it might even be that you make enough progress within this realm here to not ever see a point in getting to here, right? Because the reward you get from this risk is enough to achieve the goal, right? So what are these compounds and things that females could utilize and essentially leverage to improve and enhance their physique development prior to the use of anabolic and androgenic steroids? Well, there's two main ones that we could utilize that are biologically identical to hormones that we produce, obviously synthetically made, but biologically identical to hormones that we produce and things that we utilize within our bodies anyway. And the first two that come to mind would be growth hormone and insulin. And obviously insulin categorized into basal and rapid. For slow and fast acting essentially, but growth hormone during the growth phase could be a massive tool to utilize to drive up cell proliferation. The interaction growth hormone has with IGF-1 within skeletal muscle, obviously everywhere else as well, but solely focusing on that interaction with IGF-1 within skeletal muscle tissue. And insulin, it's benefactor to drive nutrient partitioning, which has a knock-on effect, would thus lead to more tissue being added with the replenishment of glycogen and nutrients partitioned and sent exactly where they need to be sent within the body at a much more efficient and better rate. Now, insulin is one that's demonized quite a lot on the grounds that we have seen some very, very silly protocols surrounding specifically fast acting, more so than slow. But let's think conceptually, what do we do as bodybuilders in an off season, right? Females, males alike, but again, thinking specifically females, what do we do in the off season? We push food, we push training. But one of the problems that arises with eating sometimes 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 grams of carbs a day at some points, maybe even more, depending on the individual, is that the stress that induces on your insulin production, right? So your insulin sensitivity, and the pancreas's function, then that beta cell function, takes damage over time if you don't have any parameter in place to alleviate some stress, right? To help the pancreas cope, essentially, right? What do obese people do over the course of their life? They overeat food in excess. The thing that leads to diabetes and complete insulin resistance and shutdown would be the overconsumption of carbohydrates and the excessive overworking of the pancreas to produce enough insulin to cope with said carbohydrate load, which leads to diabetes later on in life. But bodybuilders do not do much different to that of an obese person from a standpoint of, in our off seasons, we push food really high, we just train alongside it, manage it and maintain the numbers, but we are still here, further down the line at the pancreas, we are still adding that stress and that load that it has to cope with. So rather than thinking about the performance benefits, which are quite substantial, you could utilize a basal acting insulin to sit in the background during your off season, so providing the carbohydrate intake was deemed worthy of it or deemed necessary, to alleviate some stress off the pancreas. But also, like I said, you're getting those nutrient partitioning benefits that are ultimately going to lead to more muscle being added. Now again, a fast, rapid acting insulin, so something that we use to drive up performance in a workout by utilizing and shuttling those peri-workout window carbs, either pre or post workout, to drive performance, drive up glycogen retention, maximize your glycogen retention, I should say, pre to that workout, so maximum energy and fuel to drive the workout, thus getting more out of your session, or to then replenish those glycogen stores post workout with then bigger carbohydrate dense meals. So there's two that you could utilize straight away that aren't going to have any of these permanent, potentially very, very devastating long-term negative effects later on in life, like anabolic and androgenic steroids. There's a few more that we can look at here. Now, L-carnitine I lead on from growth hormone and insulin, because L-carnitine in its injectable form, not tablet or oral, or taken via the mouth, injectable L-carnitine will work synergistically with growth hormone and insulin, right? It works to make what you use more efficient. So essentially you can gain more from using a little bit less, or you can gain more out of the dose you were using by using L-carnitine alongside growth hormone when you take it maybe fasted in the morning, to drive up the fat loss, the potential fat loss effects that you are going to gain from using growth hormone in a fasted state, those anti-catabolic properties that we are looking for there before you go and do your fasted steps, or again to increase further the nutrient partitioning benefits of using a fast-acting insulin pre-workout. That's without saying that injectable L-carnitine does house some fat loss benefits on its own. So again, there's another variable that we have to leverage and drive up some form of performance enhancement, whether that's within growth promotion or within fat loss metabolization of fat from fat cells, and then those lipolytic effects we look for when we're trying to pull off the body fat. Coming on from that fat loss side of things, clenbuterol has some incredibly good anabolic properties, especially seen in females. Again, being much more sensitive to these drugs than what men are. Clenbuterol has some very good anabolic properties, or should I say anti-catabolic, should we say here, being that when you go into a fat loss phase, clenbuterol drives up your BMR, increases the amount of calories you burn, which is why it's a very, very useful fat loss tool to have in the locker. But it is also anti-catabolic. It stops muscular wastage. So in a female on prep, this is something you could use to save yourself from losing muscle tissue as your hormones naturally dropped off, if you were to stay within the realm of natural, looking solely from a sexual hormone production, not necessarily like, if you're taking clenbuterol, you're not technically classed as natural. But if you aren't willing to jeopardize those masculine effects to take compounds that would essentially have those anti-catabolic effects and make you hold on to more tissue during a prep, clenbuterol, growth hormone, they could be two that you could utilize to hang on to as much tissue as possible. It could stop that from happening over the duration of dropping into such a degree of energy deficit. Yohimbine, a very, very good, useful tool in fat loss, specifically to drive up that mobilization of fat from fat cells into triglycerides, the energy source that we utilize from fats. And then furthermore, we have metformin and telmisartan. Now, not particularly directly performance enhancements, but they do have mechanisms of action that would be seen to be positive in our performance development. Right, and this is all before we get to the realm of anabolic and androgenic steroids. So yeah, there's quite a list of things that females can leverage, again, to drive up those hypertrophic outcomes that we are looking for within skeletal muscle and within the body, thinking solely on performance enhancement at different phases of our journeys of physique development, in growth phases, fat loss phases, etc. So it seems illogical to just jump from 0 to 100 and straight away jump on a cycle and take the chance with those risks. Obviously, look, if you want to be Miss Olympia, the reward, the risk, you weigh it up yourself. It's not my place to, or my opinion that decides that, right? My opinion is irrelevant. So if you see that is deemed necessary, and you understand that these virilizing effects could potentially be quite devastating later on in life if you have you know, the idea or concept that you would like a family maybe, and that you are risking the possibility of not being able to. If you can settle with things like that, that is fine. That, you know, kudos. We live in a world where people can do what they want, you know. But for the majority, it's not understanding that there is all these different steps before that they could be taking that won't have these everlasting detrimental effects. This is not me saying these are completely risk-free, not by any means. Okay, everything comes with a risk and a reward, but the risk reward here is far less than the risk you take up here. So yeah, hopefully guys, that was a nice little introduction into performance enhancements. Next video for us will be taking a look at HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, and maybe we could take a dive into what would be the safest way to actually prep a female. Not necessarily on the grounds of a one-off, but thinking the repetitive competitor, someone who's going to go from season to season to season. But yeah, that's all talk for another video, guys. As per usual, any likes, any comments and subscribes are more than welcome, guys. And until the next time,